Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is Carl with Active English. So today I wanted to talk about a stereotype related to American people and why this stereotype is not necessarily true. So I do think it's fair to say that there is a stereotype in the world about American people, that they are loud, aggressive, assertive, outgoing, and not really shy. At least that's the stereotype, that American people are not shy. So I was very surprised, given this stereotype, to hear from my foreign students that they found American people to be more shy than they expected. Okay, so I've been teaching English for 19 years. 15 of those years I worked with Japanese foreign students, university students studying in Boston. And then 4 of those years I worked in New York City with students from China, South Korea, Japan, also from Europe and from South America. So I know that this is only my experience, so this is just anecdotal evidence, but still, across the board, during those 19 years, almost all of my students, not just from Japan, but from Korea and China, European countries, South American countries like Colombia, told me that they were surprised, actually, that they found American people to be more shy than they expected, more shy than the stereotype in their minds, right? So this was kind of interesting to me that, well, wait, actually, maybe American people are more shy than other people, other countries realize, foreigners realize. So just to clarify some terms, some vocabulary here: shyness and anxiety and introversion, right? These are different terms, different vocabulary words, right? Shyness is awkwardness in an unfamiliar social situation. Anxiety, it's more intense, right? That's like a mental health condition. It's associated with persistent, intense fear. So that's definitely much more serious than shyness. And then introversion, a lot of people use introvert and shy in the same sense, but it actually doesn't mean the same thing, right? Introversion, that's when a person draws energy from being alone. Different from extroversion. So introversion, sometimes people who are introverted can be shy, but it's not the same. It's not the same thing, right? You can be an introvert and still not be very shy. Okay, so introversion, anxiety, and shyness, these are different vocabulary terms, just to clarify. I also think it's really important to clarify about regional differences in the United States when we talk about, what percentage of American people are shy. Well, America, of course, the United States is a huge country with so many people, but there are regional differences, just like in Japan with Kansai and Kanto regions. There are some differences in personality in the United States. This is a really interesting article from The Atlantic, and it describes a research study from the journal, I think, of Personality and Psychology, where they interviewed over 1.3 million Americans over the course of 10 years about their personality, based on MBTI traits. And this is how Americans self-identified or self-described. So these are not stereotypes from other people. This is how American people labeled themselves. And it breaks down into really interesting personality types based on region. If you look at the Midwest of the United States, people tend to be friendly and conventional. If you look at the West Coast, people tend to be more relaxed and creative. And then on the East Coast of the United States, we're talking Boston, New York, Philadelphia, Washington, D.C., people identify as being temperamental and uninhibited. Temperamental means a little emotional. In American English, we say lose your temper. It's like to lose your calm. It's to sort of get angry. So temperamental is like emotional. We think of like Boston drivers being a little aggressive, New Yorkers on the subway a little aggressive, a little temperamental, and then uninhibited. So inhibited means shy. So if somebody is uninhibited, it means they are not shy. Okay, so we don't expect American people to be shy on the East Coast based on how Americans describe themselves. So that makes it even more surprising that my students, this is in New York and Boston, were surprised that American people were actually more shy than what they expected, more shy than the sort of global stereotype about Americans. So if you do a deep dive into shyness, you'll definitely run across the work of Dr. Philip Zimbardo, a psychologist who was very controversial, but also very prominent and did some really interesting research on shyness, especially shyness in adults. Okay, before Dr. Zimbardo's research, most of it focused on shyness in children, but he pioneered research on American adults and shyness, and it's really interesting what he discovered. His research was more about the 1970s and 1990s. 1970s, but I did find some information on more recent data from the 2020s based on a YouGov poll. So this is what Dr. Zimbardo found. In the 1970s, 40% of Americans adults were shy. In the 1990s, that number had jumped up to 48%. So that is a statistically significant increase in shyness from the 1970s to the 1990s. And then again, if we look at more recent data, this is not from Dr. Zimbardo, but from the YouGov poll, we see that number has increased by 3%, up to 51% of American adults being shy in the 2020s, and more recently 2026. So this is a surprise to foreigners who don't expect American people to be shy. Almost more than half of American people are shy. Okay, so we're talking about American adults. So what's the reason for this? Nobody really knows, but Dr. Zimbardo had a really interesting theory based on 3 different points. The first factor he pointed to was the electronic revolution. Now again, he's talking about the 1970s, 1980s, and 90s. So this is pre-internet, but I think the same basic dynamic you can extrapolate into the internet from the 1990s up till today. The point is that there's less face-to-face interaction because of automation. ATMs replacing bank tellers, self-checkout, and now we have, of course, DoorDash, we have Amazon Prime. So there's just less face-to-face interaction because we're doing everything through the internet or everything electronically during Dr. Zimbardo's time. So that was point number 1, and I think that is a very compelling reason that there's less face-to-face interaction. Number 2, smaller family size. If you look at the birth rate and you look at the size of American families, it's definitely decreased from the 1980s, 1990s, and today American people are having fewer children. If you think about American families in the 1950s and 60s, you have big extended families, a lot of people living with grandma and grandpa, having 3 or 4 or 5 children. The number of children has really decreased. So what this suggests is that American kids, they're coming home and they just don't have as many opportunities for interaction with their grandma, with their grandpa, or with even their brother or sister. Kids are just coming home and maybe spending time alone with video games. Okay, so the smaller family size means less opportunities for interaction, and therefore you lose your interpersonal skills, and that increases shyness. Okay, he also pointed to a very competitive culture that causes people to lose their confidence. I think this is especially true on the East Coast of the United States, where people's sense of self is so wrapped up in their identity. Again, this is just anecdotal evidence, but I went to school in upstate New York. The East Coast, there's a lot of focus on status. I remember when I graduated from high school, my high school yearbook, it published the name of every student and where they were going to college. So it created a lot of social pressure for achievement, for status. And I do think when you don't rise up, when you don't reach the sort of socially expected levels of status, this can cause sort of your self-esteem, your sense of confidence to decline, and this can also lead to shyness. Okay, so those are the 3 factors that Dr. Zimbardo pointed to that were causing this increase in shyness in the United States, and I think it's really valid. I think those are all really good points. I think it's absolutely true that those 3 factors are definitely making people more shy. Okay, so is this a problem, right? Who cares that shyness is increasing in the United States? It is a problem, according to Dr. Philip Zimbardo. His research suggested that shyness is associated with many negative consequences. Reduced career opportunities, more social isolation, a lower self-esteem, and higher anxiety. So we don't want to have those things happen to us, right? So it's not good. It's not good to be shy, right? It can cause a lot of problems in your life, and shyness is on the rise because of those 3 factors, according to Dr. Zimbardo. And then I want to say, despite this research pointing to a much higher incidence of shyness among American people than the stereotype would suggest, despite this research, my Japanese students did overwhelmingly report that the shyness rates in Japan were still higher. Okay, so even though my students, I'm talking about my Japanese students, even though my Japanese students were so surprised that American people were more shy than they expected, again, about 50% of Americans being shy, my Japanese students did report that shyness was still much higher in Japan among adults and children. Okay, so that is anecdotal evidence from my students, but I've come across that statistic in other sources too, that shyness is much higher in Japan compared to the United States. My students attributed this to the Japanese education system, which was much more passive, that, did not encourage students to express their opinion. This whole idea of silence being golden as one of the factors that led to Japanese people not developing as much self-confidence with expressing their opinion, and whereas American education system really promotes a more active classroom, express your opinion, engagement, much more sense of individual expression. But that's a whole nother story for a whole nother video. I think that would be really fascinating to look at American versus Japanese education and which one promotes more self-confidence. Okay, so just really interesting anecdotal evidence from my teaching, and also some research that supports that from Dr. Zimbardo. The main point here being that American people are more shy than you realize. There is a stereotype. American people are outgoing, bold, assertive, but it's actually not completely true. 50% of American adults are shy, and according to research, that number is slowly increasing. All right, so hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you so much for watching. This is Carl with Active English. Hope you have a great day. I'll see you later. Bye.